the last species to make humanity angry. We erased them from the galaxy. The morning sun cast long shadows across the landing platform of New Terra Colony as Commander Blake Harrison adjusted his dress uniform. Today would mark the first official contact between humanity and the Vorthak Empire, a species that had dominated their corner of the galaxy for over 3,000 years. Blake checked his communication device one more time, ensuring the translation protocols were working perfectly. Captain Maria Santos stood beside him, her weathered face showing both excitement and concern. She had spent the last 15 years building New Terra from nothing more than a rocky planet with breathable air. Now her small colony was about to become the center of galactic attention. "Remember, Commander," Maria said quietly. "They've agreed to this meeting, but our intelligence suggests they're not exactly known for their patience with smaller species." Blake nodded. The Vorthak had finally responded to humanity's diplomatic signals after 2 years of attempts. Their message had been brief and somewhat dismissive, but it was contact nonetheless. Humanity had been expanding slowly into this region of space, always careful to respect existing territorial claims. The sky began to darken as massive shadows fell across the colony. Blake looked up to see ships descending through the atmosphere. These were not like human vessels, which focused on efficiency and functionality. The Vorthak ships were enormous, decorated with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move in the light. Each ship was easily 10 times larger than necessary for its crew, built to intimidate rather than impress. Dr. Emma Rodriguez joined them on the platform, her scientific equipment ready to record this historic moment. She had studied every piece of available data about the Vorthak, though information was limited. What they knew came mostly from other species who spoke of the Vorthak in hushed, respectful tones. "Incredible," Emma whispered as the lead ship touched down, the gravitational field manipulation required for a ship that size to land so gently. "Their technology is remarkable." The ship's ramp descended with a low humming sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. What emerged made all 3 humans take an involuntary step backward. The Vorthak were massive, standing at least 12 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in what looked like natural crystalline armor that reflected the sunlight in brilliant colors. Each Vorthak had 4 arms, and their movements showed incredible strength barely held in check. Leading the group was clearly their commander, wearing additional decorative elements that marked his high rank. His eyes glowed with an inner light as he surveyed the human delegation. Behind him came 6 other Vorthak, each carrying themselves with the confidence of beings who had never encountered serious opposition. Blake stepped forward, offering the traditional human greeting gesture. "Welcome to New Terra. I am Commander Blake Harrison, representing the United Earth Colonial Administration. We are honored by your presence." The lead Vorthak studied Blake for a long moment before responding. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonated with authority. "I am High Marshal Kavath of the Vorthak Empire. We have come to assess your species and determine the most efficient method of integration." Maria felt a chill at those words, but Blake maintained his diplomatic composure. "Integration, High Marshal? We were hoping to discuss trade agreements and cultural exchange." High Marshal Kavath made a sound that might have been laughter. "Trade implies equality, small one. The Vorthak Empire has reviewed your species' capabilities. You are resourceful and capable of useful labor, but you lack the strength and wisdom to govern yourselves in this region of space." Emma's scientific curiosity overcame her diplomatic training. "High Marshal, we would be fascinated to learn more about your gravitational manipulation technology. Perhaps we could arrange an exchange of scientific knowledge." The High Marshal's glowing eyes fixed on Emma, and she felt as though she was being examined like a specimen. "Your curiosity is noted, small scientist. Such traits make your species useful for research tasks under proper supervision." Blake's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his voice level. "I'm afraid there may be some misunderstanding, High Marshal. Humanity has no interest in becoming part of another species' empire. We seek partnership between equals." "Equals?" High Marshal Kavath's forearms spread wide in what was clearly a gesture of amusement among his people. "Tell me, Commander Blake Harrison, how many star systems does your species control?" 47 colonized systems with exploration ongoing and 12 more, Blake replied honestly. "The Vorthak Empire spans 200 systems. Our technology allows us to reshape matter at the molecular level, manipulate gravity itself, and travel between stars in ways your species cannot comprehend. In what manner do you consider yourselves our equals? Maria stepped forward. High Marshal, with respect, the measure of a species is not only in the territory they control or the power of their technology. We believe wisdom lies in cooperation and mutual respect. High Marshal Kavath's eyes dimmed slightly, which Emma's studies suggested indicated either deep thought or growing irritation. Wisdom, you say, yet you have settled on worlds rich in trilithium crystals without understanding their true value. You mine duranium with primitive techniques that waste 70% of each deposit. Your wisdom appears to be that of children playing with tools they do not understand. Blake felt the meeting slipping away from diplomatic norms, but he pressed on. Perhaps you could teach us better techniques in exchange for other resources or knowledge we might offer. Teach? High Marshal Kavath's voice rose and the other Vorthak behind him shifted in what was clearly anticipation. The strong do not teach the weak. The strong guide the weak. They provide direction, structure, and purpose. Emma noticed that the Vorthak had positioned themselves in a way that blocked all exits from the platform. This was no longer feeling like a diplomatic meeting. High Marshal, she said carefully, humanity values its independence. We are grateful for your offer of guidance, but we prefer to develop at our own pace. High Marshal Kavath took several steps forward, his massive form towering over the humans. The crystalline armor on his chest pulsed with inner light. Preference is a luxury afforded to those with strength. Your species will serve the Vorthak Empire. You will mine the resources we require, using techniques we provide. You will research problems we assign to you. In return, we will ensure your continued existence and protection from other species who might be less generous. Blake's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, then stopped. Even if he could draw and fire, what could human weapons do against beings whose natural armor appeared stronger than most metals? High Marshal, I must decline your offer. Humanity chooses its own path. The laugh that came from High Marshal Kavath was like rocks grinding together. Choice, another luxury you no longer possess. He gestured to one of his subordinates who activated a device on his forearm. Suddenly, the sky filled with Vorthak ships, hundreds of them, their weapons clearly visible and charging with ominous energy. Maria realized with horror that this had never been a diplomatic meeting. It had been a show of force designed to demonstrate humanity's helplessness. Your colony worlds are now under Vorthak protection, High Marshal Kavath announced. Resistance will result in unnecessary casualties. Cooperation will result in efficient integration into our empire. Choose wisely, Commander Blake Harrison. Blake looked up at the ships filling the sky, then back at the towering alien before him. In that moment, he made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. He activated his emergency beacon, sending a coded message that would reach Earth in 6 hours. High Marshal, Blake said quietly, I think you may have made a serious mistake. High Marshal Kavath's eyes blazed brighter. The only mistake would be continued resistance to the inevitable. As Vorthak soldiers began emerging from the ships to secure the colony, Blake wondered if humanity's long period of peaceful expansion was about to end. What the Vorthak didn't know was that humanity had been peaceful by choice, not necessity. The message racing toward Earth would change everything. The last species to make humanity angry, we erased them from the galaxy. 3 months had passed since the Vorthak occupation began, and the galaxy had learned to fear the sound of their ships. Admiral Rebecca Cross stood in the command center of the Luna Defense Station, reading reports that made her stomach turn. 12 human colony worlds had fallen under Vorthak control, their populations forced into slave labor camps. The reports came from brave resistance fighters who managed to smuggle information past Vorthak surveillance. Lieutenant Jake Morrison had been leading guerrilla operations on New Terra, documenting the horrific conditions that humans now endured. Admiral, Jake's voice crackled through the encrypted communication channel. They're treating us like animals. Work details start before dawn and continue until people collapse. Anyone who shows signs of weakness disappears. They've set up mining quotas that are impossible to meet without casualties. Rebecca gripped her coffee cup tighter. How many casualties this week, Lieutenant? 43 confirmed dead on New Terra alone. The Vorthak don't even bother with medical care. When someone gets injured in the mines, they just replace them with another worker. The other reports WW are equally grim. On Kepler Station, The Vorthak had forced human engineers to redesign the entire asteroid mining operation, pushing equipment beyond safe limits. On Haven Colony, they had stripped away all communication equipment, leaving families unable to contact loved ones on other worlds. General Thorn Kavoth, brother to High Marshal Kavoth, had taken personal command of the slave operations. Unlike his brother, who at least maintained some pretense of civilization, Thorn seemed to enjoy the suffering he caused. Reports described him walking through work sites, casually striking workers who moved too slowly. The worst part, Jake continued, is how they talk about us. They call us useful mammals and discuss our work capacity the same way they might evaluate mining equipment. To them, we're just another type of tool. Rebecca terminated the communication and walked to the large window overlooking Earth. The planet looked peaceful from here, but she knew that appearance was deceiving. Deep beneath the surface, in facilities that had been hidden for over 2 centuries, humanity's true capabilities were awakening. President Michael Reed called an emergency session of the United Earth Defense Council that afternoon. Rebecca took her place among the other military leaders, noting the grim expressions around the table. These were people who had spent their careers maintaining peace, but peace was no longer an option. Ladies and gentlemen, President Reed began, we have a decision to make. The Vorthak believe they have conquered 12 of our colonies and enslaved our people. They believe humanity is a weak species suitable only for manual labor. Intelligence suggests they plan to expand their operations to include all human worlds within the next year. Fleet Admiral David Park activated a holographic display showing the current situation. Red zones marked Vorthak-controlled space, spreading like an infection across human territory. Mr. President, our conventional forces could probably retake 1 or 2 systems, but the cost would be enormous. The Vorthak have superior numbers, and their technology gives them significant advantages. Dr. Lisa Kim, head of strategic warfare, cleared her throat. Mr. President, perhaps it's time to consider alternatives to conventional warfare. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what Dr. Kim was referring to, though few had clearance to know the details. For over 300 years, humanity had been developing weapons and technologies that were kept hidden from the rest of the galaxy. The official reason was to avoid arms races with other species. The real reason was much simpler. Some weapons were too dangerous to reveal unless absolutely necessary. Dr. Kim, President Reed said carefully, explain to the Council what options we have. Dr. Kim activated her own display, showing schematic diagrams that made several Council members lean forward in surprise. Project Nightfall has been operational for 60 years. We have a fleet of 500 stealth dreadnoughts hidden in deep space, each equipped with reality manipulation technology. Project Phantom has developed personal armor that allows soldiers to phase through solid matter. Project Genesis, she paused. Project Genesis can manipulate matter at the quantum level. Admiral Rebecca Cross felt a chill. Even with her high security clearance, she had only heard rumors about Genesis. Dr. Kim, what exactly can Genesis do? Genesis can edit the fundamental properties of matter and energy. In theory, it could make a star burn colder, cause gravity to flow backward, or alter the atomic structure of an entire planet. We've never tested it at full capacity because the implications are too dangerous. President Reed stood and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful Earth below. The Vorthak have made a fundamental error in judgment. They believe our peaceful nature indicates weakness. They've enslaved our people and treated them worse than animals. They've forced us to consider options we hoped never to use. Fleet Admiral Park leaned back in his chair. Mr. President, if we reveal these capabilities, every species in the galaxy will view us differently. There will be no going back to the peaceful expansion we've enjoyed. The peaceful expansion ended the moment they put chains on our people, President Reed replied. Dr. Kim, I want full operational plans for a response that will not only free our colonies, but send a clear message to any other species considering similar actions. Dr. Kim nodded. Mr. President, I recommend Operation Nemesis. Phase 1 involves deploying the Shadow Fleet to systematically eliminate Vorthak military assets. Phase 2 involves demonstrating Genesis capabilities on a limited scale. Phase 3. She hesitated. Phase 3 would ensure that no species ever makes this mistake again. What does Phase 3 involve? Rebecca asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. Complete species termination, not just killing the Vorthak, but removing them from existence entirely. Their technology, their culture, their very DNA structure would be erased from the quantum foundation of reality. The room fell completely silent. President Reed returned to his seat and looked at each council member in turn. The Vorthak have enslaved our people and demonstrated that they view humanity as inferior beings, suitable only for labor. They've shown no mercy and no respect for our lives or dignity. He activated his personal authorization device. I hereby authorize Operation Nemesis, all phases. Admiral Cross, you will command the Shadow Fleet. Dr. Kim, prepare Genesis for full deployment. The Vorthak wanted to see what humanity is capable of when pushed. Let's show them. As the council members filed out to prepare for war, Rebecca paused at the door. Mr. President, once we do this, there's no pretending to be the peaceful species anymore. President Reed's expression was cold as steel. Admiral, they mistook our kindness for weakness. That was their choice. Now they get to live with the consequences, however briefly. Far away in Vorthak space, General Thorn Kavath stood over a group of exhausted human workers, unaware that his species had just sealed its fate. The humans continued their backbreaking labor, but hidden communication devices were already spreading word through the resistance networks. Help was coming. The kind of help that would make the Vorthak wish they had never heard of humanity. The galaxy was about to learn why humanity had remained peaceful for so long. It wasn't because they lacked the power to be otherwise. It was because they understood exactly what that power could do. The last species to make humanity angry, we erased them from the galaxy. First sign that something had changed came when Vorthak sensors detected impossible readings in empty space. Admiral Rebecca Cross stood on the bridge of the HSS Retribution, watching as her shadow fleet materialized around 3 Vorthak patrol ships. The enemy vessels had been conducting routine sweeps of human mining operations, ensuring the slave workers met their quotas. Captain Alex Turner commanded the destroyer Silent Fury, positioned directly above the largest Vorthak ship. His crew had trained for this moment for years, but seeing the enemy up close made the reality sink in. The Vorthak vessels were impressive, their crystalline hulls glowing with internal energy. Weapons arrays that could level cities. All ships report ready. Admiral, came the voice of Commander Lisa Hayes from the communications station. Rebecca nodded. Begin Operation Nemesis. Show them what happens when you mistake humanity's nature. The attack was swift and precise. Human ships that had been invisible moments before unleashed weapons that defied conventional physics. Energy beams that curved through space-time struck Vorthak shields and simply passed through them as if they didn't exist. Reality-warping torpedoes caused sections of enemy ships to fold in on themselves. The Vorthak patrol leader tried to send a distress signal, but found his communications equipment failing, as human jamming technology rewrote the fundamental properties of electromagnetic radiation in the local area. Within 3 minutes, all 3 Vorthak ships were drifting hulks, their crews unconscious from gravitational fields that had been precisely adjusted to cause immediate neural shutdown. Captain Turner opened a channel to the lead Vorthak ship. This is Captain Alex Turner of the United Earth Defense Force. Your crews are alive but unconscious. When they wake up, give them a message. Tell them that humanity is no longer playing by their rules. News of the attack reached General Thorn Kavoth within hours. He stood in his command center on New Terra, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. 3 of his patrol ships had simply vanished from sensors, then reappeared as derelict hulks. The crew reports, when they finally regained consciousness, spoke of human ships that appeared from nowhere and weapons that ignored Vorthak defenses. Impossible, Thorn growled, his forearms clenched in frustration. Humans don't have this technology. Our intelligence reports show primitive fusion drives and basic energy weapons. His aide, Sub-Commander Vex, nervously adjusted his equipment. Sir, perhaps the humans have been hiding their true capabilities. Thorn's eyes blazed with anger. Then we will crush them completely. Alert High Marshal Kavoth. Tell him to bring the full battle fleet. We will demonstrate to these mammals what happens when they resist the Vorthak Empire. But the humans were not finished. Admiral Cross had divided her shadow fleet into dozens of task forces, each targeting different Vorthak positions simultaneously. The strikes came like clockwork. Every few hours, another Vorthak installation went dark. Colonel Nina Hayes led the Special Forces teams tasked with liberati, non-human prisoners. Her soldiers wore armor that could phase through solid matter. making Vorthak prison walls meaningless. They moved through heavily defended facilities like ghosts, rescuing human workers and planting quantum beacons throughout Vorthak infrastructure. Package delivered, Nina reported as her team finished placing beacons in a Vorthak command center. Dr. Kim's toys are in position. The rescued humans told horrific stories of their treatment. Families separated, workers beaten for minor infractions, medical experiments conducted on those too weak to continue mining operations. Each report strengthened the resolve of the human forces. High Marshal Kavath arrived at the front lines with a fleet of 200 ships, the largest Vorthak military force assembled in 50 years. He had confidence in his superior numbers and technology. The humans had shown some unexpected capabilities, but they were still a young species facing an empire that had dominated this region of space for millennia. "Brother," Thorn reported as Kavath's flagship entered orbit around New Terra, "the human attacks have been surgical. They're targeting our patrol routes and supply lines but avoiding direct confrontation with our main forces." Kavath studied the tactical displays. The human attacks showed sophisticated planning and technology he didn't understand. But they also showed restraint. "They're testing us," he concluded, "seeing how we respond to pressure. Very well. We will show them the full might of the Vorthak Empire." The massive Vorthak fleet began moving toward the last known position of human forces, their sensors sweeping space for any sign of the enemy. Kavath was confident that once he engaged the humans in open battle, their technological tricks would prove insufficient against overwhelming firepower. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Admiral Cross watched the Vorthak fleet approach on her tactical display. 500 human ships hung invisible in space around them, their stealth systems making them undetectable to Vorthak sensors. The enemy had walked directly into a carefully prepared trap. "Dr. Kim," Rebecca spoke into her communication device. "Are you ready for the demonstration?" "Genesis array is charged and targeted, Admiral," came the reply from Earth. "Phase 1 parameters are locked in." Rebecca looked at the massive Vorthak fleet, their ships bristling with weapons and confidence. High Marshal Kavath had brought everything he had, expecting to overwhelm humanity with raw power. Instead, he was about to witness the true extent of human capabilities. "All ships prepare for coordinated strike. Show them what we've been building while they thought we were primitive." The Shadow Fleet decloaked simultaneously, appearing around the Vorthak formation like vengeful spirits. But instead of opening fire immediately, they simply held position, weapons charged but not yet firing. Kavath's voice came over all frequencies, filled with arrogant confidence. "Human vessels, you are outnumbered 4-1. Surrender now and we will be merciful in your punishment." Admiral Cross responded calmly. "High Marshal Kavath, this is Admiral Rebecca Cross of the United Earth Defense Force. You enslaved our people. You treated them worse than animals. You believed our peaceful nature indicated weakness. You were wrong. Your tricks may work against patrol ships, human, but you face the full might of the Vorthak Empire. We have weapons that can shatter planets." "High Marshal." Rebecca's voice carried a chill that made even her own crew nervous. "We have weapons that can edit reality itself." "Dr. Kim, initiate Genesis Phase 1. Target, the Vorthak flagship's gravitational field." Light years away, Dr. Kim activated a device that most of humanity hoped would never be used. The Genesis array reached across space and touched the quantum foundation of matter around High Marshal Kavath's ship. Suddenly, gravity around the flagship began flowing upward instead of toward the ship's center. The massive vessel, designed to operate in normal gravitational conditions, began tearing itself apart as every atom experienced force in the wrong direction. Within minutes, the pride of the Vorthak fleet had become an expanding cloud of debris. Its crew lost not to weapons but to physics itself turning against them. "Impossible," Thorn whispered from his command center on the surface. Admiral Cross's voice filled the stunned silence. "That was a demonstration, General Thorn Kavath. We can do much worse. Evacuate all human colonies immediately, or we will show you what Phase 2 looks like." For the first time in their species' history, the Vorthak felt true fear. The last species to make humanity angry, we erased them from the galaxy. The Vorthak Empire was collapsing faster than anyone thought possible. General Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of his assault ship, watching another Vorthak stronghold surrender without firing a shot. Word of what had happened to High Marshal Kavath's flagship had spread throughout their military, and morale was breaking down completely. Sir, reported Captain Sarah Kim, the Vorthic forces on Rigel Prime are requesting terms of surrender. They're offering to release all human prisoners immediately. Marcus nodded grimly. Too little, too late. Continue the advance. No negotiations until every human colony is liberated and every Vorthak military installation is neutralized. The human assault forces were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Soldiers wearing armor that adapted to any attack in real time, weapons that could rewrite local physics, and ships that moved through space in ways that defied conventional understanding. But more terrifying than their technology was their systematic approach to warfare. They weren't just defeating the Vorthak. They were dismantling their entire civilization piece by piece. On the planet below, Vorthak civilians watched in terror as human soldiers phased through the walls of their military compounds. The humans weren't harming non-combatants, but they were methodically destroying every piece of military equipment, every weapon, every ship. The message was clear. The Vorthak would never again be able to threaten anyone. General Thorn Kavath had retreated to the Vorthak homeworld, gathering the remnants of his fleet around their most heavily defended planet. He still commanded over 50 ships and had the support of planetary defense systems that had never been breached in 3,000 years of Vorthak history. Brother, he transmitted to High Marshal Kavath, who was now commanding from a secondary ship after the destruction of his flagship. We must seek alliance with other species. The humans cannot stand against the combined might of the entire galactic community. But High Marshal Kavath's attempts at diplomacy had already failed. Ambassador Patricia Foster had spent the past month visiting every neighboring civilization with detailed records of Vorthak atrocities. The holographic recordings of human slave camps, the documentation of casual brutality, the evidence of Vorthak arrogance toward all smaller species. The Zelani Republic, longtime enemies of the Vorthak, had actually sent congratulations to humanity. The Arcturus Trade Federation had imposed a complete embargo on Vorthak space. Even species that had been neutral were now openly supporting human operations, providing intelligence and supply bases. Dr. Emma Rodriguez worked in a laboratory aboard the human research vessel Discovery, studying captured Vorthak technology and biology. Her fascination with their species had turned to cold scientific analysis as she searched for weaknesses. The same crystalline armor that made them nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons could be targeted at the molecular level, causing it to shatter like glass. Admiral Cross, Emma reported over the secure channel. I've found a way to neutralize their natural defenses completely. If we can get close enough to deploy the molecular disruptor, their armor becomes useless. How close? Rebecca asked from her flagship. Physical contact. The disruptor has to touch their armor to begin the cascade reaction. Rebecca considered this. Dr. Rodriguez, prepare the disruptor for mass deployment. Colonel Hayes, I have a special mission for your teams. Nina Hayes and her Special Forces soldiers had been conducting precision strikes throughout Vorthak space, but this mission was different. They would infiltrate the Vorthak homeworld itself and deploy Emma's molecular disruptor in the main military complex. The mission was surprisingly easy. Vorthak security had been designed to stop conventional attacks, but human soldiers who could phase through solid matter made their defenses meaningless. Nina's team moved through the most secure facilities on the planet, like they weren't even there. Package delivered, Nina reported as the molecular disruptor began its work. Vorthak armor will be useless within 6 hours. High Marshal Kavath stood in his war room, surrounded by advisors who were running out of ideas. The humans had cut through 50,000 years of Vorthak military tradition, like it meant nothing. Their technology was beyond anything in Vorthak experience, and their strategic thinking was flawless. High Marshal, one of his advisors suggested desperately, perhaps we could evacuate to the outer rim, rebuild our forces in unexplored space. Kavath's eyes dimmed with exhaustion. With what ships? They've destroyed 60% of our fleet. With what resources? They've captured our main industrial worlds. With what population? They've documented our crimes so thoroughly that no species will shelter us. A communication request came through from the human fleet. Kavath hesitated, then accepted it. Commander Blake Harrison appeared on the screen. The same human who had stood on New Terra 3 months ago trying to establish peaceful relations. Hi, M. Arshal Kavath, Blake said formally. I am authorized to offer you one final opportunity for surrender. Kavoth's pride flared. What terms do you offer? Complete and unconditional surrender of all Vorthak military forces. Release of any remaining human prisoners. Full cooperation with war crimes tribunals. Dismantling of your entire military infrastructure. And if we refuse? Blake's expression remained neutral, but his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. Then we proceed to Phase 2 of Operation Nemesis. Dr. Kim's Genesis array will demonstrate its full capabilities. Kavoth looked at his tactical display. 50 ships against 500 human vessels equipped with reality-warping technology. His homeworld surrounded by enemies who could walk through walls and rewrite physics itself. His people's armor turning to dust thanks to human molecular science. Commander Harrison, Kavoth said finally, you were trying to establish peaceful relations when we first met. Yes. What changed? Blake's calm expression cracked slightly, showing the anger beneath. You enslaved our people. You treated them like animals. You believed our peaceful nature made us weak. You chose to find out what we're really capable of when someone pushes us too far. Kavoth closed his eyes. In that moment, he understood the magnitude of his species' error. The humans hadn't been hiding their technology out of fear or primitive thinking. They had been protecting the galaxy from what they could do when truly provoked. I refuse your terms, Kavoth said, his pride overriding his logic. The Vorthak Empire does not surrender to mammals. Blake nodded sadly. Then you've chosen extinction. Dr. Kim, you are authorized for Genesis Phase 2. The transmission ended, leaving Kavoth alone with his advisors and the weight of his decision. Outside, human ships moved into final attack positions around the Vorthak homeworld. In her laboratory on Earth, Dr. Kim initialized the Genesis array for its most terrible purpose. Phase 2 wasn't about destroying ships or planets. It was about editing the quantum structure of an entire species. Beginning species-wide genetic cascade, she reported to President Reed. Timeline for complete biological breakdown 72 hours. High Marshal Kavoth felt the first effects within an hour. A tingling sensation in his crystalline armor. A slight weakness in his limbs. Around him, his advisors were experiencing the same symptoms. On ships throughout the remaining Vorthak fleet, crews began collapsing as their genetic structure started unraveling at the quantum level. What have we done? Kavoth whispered as he watched his hands beginning to fade. The answer came from the human fleet surrounding his world. You taught us that sometimes the peaceful option isn't enough. Now the galaxy will remember what happens when someone makes that mistake. The Vorthak homeworld's communications fell silent as its population succumbed to the genetic cascade. The last great empire to challenge humanity was ending not with fire and explosions, but with the quiet dissolution of their very existence. The galaxy watched in terrified fascination as an entire species simply faded away, victims of their own arrogance and humanity's terrible mercy. The last species to make humanity angry. We erased them from the galaxy, Doctor. Lisa Kim stood before the Genesis array, humanity's most terrible creation, as it hummed with power that could reshape reality itself. The massive device filled an entire underground facility beneath the Swiss Alps, its quantum processors calculating changes to the fundamental structure of existence. What she was about to do had never been attempted before, and she hoped it would never be necessary again. Phase 3 authorization confirmed, came President Reed's voice through the secure communication system. Dr. Kim, you are authorized to proceed with complete species erasure. Lisa's hands trembled slightly as she entered the final command codes. Phase 2 had been devastating enough, causing the biological breakdown of every Vorthak in the galaxy. But Phase 3 was something else entirely. It would reach back through time itself and edit the Vorthak out of existence retroactively. On the screens around her, she could see the final reports from Vorthak space. Their ships drifted empty, their cities stood silent, their military installations had gone dark. The genetic cascade had worked exactly as designed. But High Marshal Kavoth and his brother Thorn were still alive, the last two members of their species, protected by experimental medical equipment in their final stronghold. Admiral Rebecca Cross watched from the bridge of her flagship as the last Vorthak resistance crumbled. The species that had dominated this region of space for 3,000 years was down to a single ship and 2 survivors. It should have felt like victory, But Rebecca felt only grim satisfaction. "Admiral," reported Captain Turner from the Silent Fury, "we're detecting massive energy readings from the remaining Vorthak vessel. They appear to be charging some kind of weapon." Rebecca wasn't surprised. Cornered enemies often chose to go down fighting rather than face the reality of their defeat. All ships maintain safe distance. Let them make their final gesture. Inside the dying Vorthak ship, High Marshal Kavoth struggled to remain standing. The genetic cascade was affecting him too, just more slowly thanks to the medical systems keeping him alive. His brother Thorn had collapsed an hour ago, his massive form now barely breathing on the command deck floor. "Brother," Thorn whispered, his voice weak. "What have we brought upon our people?" Kavoth looked at his hands, watching as his crystalline armor began to crack and fade. "We thought they were just another primitive species to exploit. We thought their peaceful nature meant weakness. What are they really?" Kavoth remembered Commander Blake Harrison standing on New Terra, offering friendship and cooperation. He remembered dismissing human concerns about equality and respect. He remembered the moment he decided that humans were nothing more than useful animals for Vorthak purposes. "They are what we pretended to be," Kavoth said quietly. "Masters of technology beyond our understanding. But unlike us, they chose to use their power for protection rather than conquest." Through the ship's sensors, he could see human vessels surrounding him. 500 ships equipped with weapons that could rewrite physics itself. A species that had hidden their true capabilities for centuries, revealing them only when pushed beyond all patience. "High Marshal Kavoth," came a transmission from the human fleet. It was Admiral Cross herself. "This is your final opportunity to surrender." Kavoth activated his communication system. "Admiral Cross, I am curious about something. How long has humanity possessed these capabilities?" "Over 300 years, Rebecca replied honestly. "We've been hiding our true technology since we first began expanding into space." "Why?" "Because we learned early in our development that showing too much power makes other species either fearful or aggressive. We preferred to be underestimated rather than start wars." Kavoth felt a bitter laugh escape his throat. "And we forced you to reveal everything. You enslaved our people. You treated them worse than animals. You gave us no choice." Through his ship's sensors, Kavoth could see activity on the human vessels. Some kind of massive energy buildup was occurring throughout their fleet. He realized they were preparing something even more devastating than what they had already shown. On Earth, Dr. Kim made her final preparations for Genesis Phase 3. Unlike the previous phases, which had operated in normal spacetime, Phase 3 would reach into the quantum foundation of reality itself. It would edit the universal constants that allowed the Vorthak to exist, removing them not just from the present but from history itself. "Dr. Kim," President Reed's voice was solemn. "Are you certain about the consequences?" Lisa checked her calculations one final time. "Mr. President, Phase 3 will remove all traces of the Vorthak from the timeline. Their technology will cease to function, because the universe will no longer remember how it was supposed to work. Their worlds will appear as if they were never colonized. Even the historical records of other species will show empty space where the Vorthak Empire once stood. And the only beings who will remember them? Humans, Mr. President. We'll be the only species in the galaxy that remembers the Vorthak ever existed." President Reed was quiet for a long moment. "Proceed with Phase 3. Let this be the final lesson for any species that mistakes our peaceful nature for weakness." The Genesis Array's power output increased exponentially as it began reaching through dimensions that most species couldn't even detect. Dr. Kim watched as reality itself began responding to her commands, the fundamental forces that held matter together, accepting new parameters. High Marshal Kavoth felt it beginning immediately. The metal of his ship started becoming transparent, as if the universe was forgetting what Vorthak alloys were supposed to look like. His brother's breathing became even more labored as their very DNA began unraveling at the quantum level. "Admiral Cross," Kavoth transmitted desperately. "What are you doing to us?" Rebecca's voice was steady and cold. "We're making sure that no species ever makes your mistake again. We're removing you from existence entirely." Kavoth looked around his ship as equipment began fading from view. The walls were becoming see-through. The deck beneath his feet was losing solidity. Even his memories of other Vorthak were becoming dim, as if his species' entire history was being erased. "This is impossible," he whispered. "High Marshal," Rebecca's voice carried across space. You called you primitive mammals. You enslaved our people because you thought we were weak. You believed that might makes right, and that the strong should dominate the weak. Kavoth could see his own hands becoming translucent. His brother Thorn was already more ghost than solid matter. Around them their ship was dissolving as the universe forgot that Vorthak technology had ever existed. What are you? Kavoth asked, his voice barely audible. We are humanity, Admiral Cross replied. We are the species that chooses peace when possible and total war when necessary. We are the beings who prefer cooperation to conquest, but who will completely erase anyone who threatens our people. Kavoth felt his consciousness beginning to fade as his brain tissue lost cohesion. In his final moments, he understood the true horror of his species' situation. They hadn't just been defeated. They were being deleted from reality itself, erased so completely that they would never have existed at all. We thought you were just another primitive species, he whispered into the void. Rebecca's final response echoed across the empty space, where a Vorthak ship had been moments before. We are the last species you will ever make angry. The Genesis array completed its work, sending changes rippling through space-time itself. Throughout the galaxy, Vorthak cities simply faded away, leaving behind worlds that appeared to have been uninhabited for millions of years. Their technology stopped functioning as the universe forgot how it was supposed to work. Their historical records vanished from the databases of other species. Captain Maria Santos stood on the surface of New Terra, watching as the mining equipment that the Vorthak had installed simply dissolved into nothingness. The slave camps were gone, the guard towers had vanished. Even the landing platforms where Vorthak ships had touched down showed no signs of ever being used. It's like they never existed, she said into her communicator. That's the point, Admiral Cross replied from orbit. We want the galaxy to remember this lesson, but we don't want anyone to be able to study Vorthak technology or use their methods against other species. Throughout human space, the liberated colonies were returning to normal operations, but the freed workers retained their memories of Vorthak brutality, serving as living reminders of what had transpired. Dr. Kim shut down the Genesis array, sealing it away in the hope that humanity would never need to use it again. The device that could edit reality itself was too dangerous to leave active, too terrible to ever deploy except in the most extreme circumstances. President Reed addressed the United Nations Assembly later that day. Ladies and gentlemen, the Vorthak crisis has been resolved. Our people are free, our colonies are secure, and we have sent a message to the galaxy that will echo for centuries. A reporter asked, Mr. President, what happened to the Vorthak Empire? Reed's expression was carefully neutral. What Vorthak Empire? Our records show no evidence of any species by that name in this region of space. The galaxy received humanity's final message about the incident through every communication channel simultaneously. It was brief, simple, and terrifying in its implications. To all species and civilizations, humanity prefers peace, cooperation, and mutual respect. We believe in the value of all intelligent life and the importance of building a galaxy where different species can coexist peacefully. However, should any species choose to enslave our people, treat them as animals, or mistake our peaceful nature for weakness, remember this moment. Remember the empty space where an empire once stood. Remember that we are the last species you want to make angry. We hope we never have to demonstrate this again. The message was signed simply, the United Earth Defense Force. In the years that followed, no species ever again attempted to conquer human territory. The empty star systems that had once housed the Vorthak Empire served as silent monuments to the consequences of underestimating humanity's resolve. And in classified facilities throughout human space, the weapons that could rewrite reality remained hidden, waiting in case they were ever needed again. Because while humanity preferred peace, they had learned that sometimes the only way to preserve peace was to demonstrate the terrible cost of breaking it. The galaxy was a much more peaceful place after that, though most species could never quite remember why.